Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast today on the 2nd of December, 2018. And I'd like to start off today by getting your opinions on what you think about new intro music and intro for the podcast. So I was thinking for a while about switching up my intros, mostly because I know there's some people that aren't crazy about the death metal out there. So it's very specific to one type of person about what music you like. So I decided to change it up, do something that doesn't really have the screamo added in, and also I was thinking that if I'm going to do that, maybe I should switch up the intro. So I'm really curious as to what people think about it in the comments below. Let me know if you like it or if you want something different. If you want another different video to go along with it, whether you like the music or not. So we're going to talk about a few different stories today. First one's going to be talking a little bit more about the Global Compact for Migration, because the Global Compact has been, it's getting close to being ratified, but then there's a disturbing video that came out from the members of European Parliament when they're discussing the Global Compact for Migration. We're going to be talking a little bit about Raj Grewal and his gambling debts when a Liberal MP for Brampton. And it's funny because he was originally going to resign, then he didn't resign. Now apparently his debts are paid off, so we'll take a look into him and a video that he posted about the subject. Going to talk a little bit about the PPC and how the media is starting to take attention to it. But despite that, it's clear that what they're going to do is going to be a hit job on Maxime Bernier and the people who support him. That's going to come from Derek Rance. We're going to be talking about the USMCA, which just got signed at the G20, and there's a hilarious picture of Justin Trudeau there. And then we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. Going to be talking a little bit about how, despite the fact that the Bill Morneau in his fall fiscal updates was talking about doing tax cuts, would have added tens of billions of new debt, and how it actually wouldn't help the economy. It appears that Trudeau has fallen suit to what Donald Trump has done and has made large tax cuts to our corporate sector right now. So we're going to get all into that. And the first thing I wanted to talk about today is this Global Compact for Migration. It's getting quite concerning, especially with this video that's coming out from European Parliament. They are talking directly about the Global Compact for Migration, and yes, this is something from Europe. It doesn't mean that what's coming out is going to affect Canada, but what is written into the Global Compact for Migration will come back to affect us, because what they make reference to in here is simply what's inside of the sections inside of the compact itself. So we can see that this is coming out of Europe. You can guarantee that this is coming here to Canada very soon. So I got this video pulled up. It was only came out a few days ago, maybe a week at most. I don't even think it's been that long. And just listen to what these people have to say about what's going to happen under the Global Compact for Migration, because it has to do with the freedom of the press. The freedom of the press is a important pillar of democracy. Without it, then you really do enter into at least a soft form of dictatorship, because the whole idea of the freedom of the press is to hold the people in power to account. And this is what they're supposed to be doing. But one of the sections inside the Global Compact for Migration is literally going to limit the ability of the press and actually possibly jail journalists and anyone else that is discussing, that is getting critical of migration. So let's go to the video now, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about.
Dear guests, it's nice to have you here on our Strasbourg press conference. And I would like to say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down. The Compact for Migration is legalization of mass migration. It's declaring migration as a human right. So in fact, it will become impossible to criticize Ms. Merkel's welcome migrants politics without being at risk to be jailed for hate speech. So this agreement, to our humble opinion, is a coup d'etat of pro-migrant liberal globalists. And it will greatly benefit multinationals. Because, you know, countries who import the third world will become the third world. And it's absolutely clear, and you all know that in third world countries, multinationals dictate the rules. It will become impossible to state that integration of migrants from Islamic countries in Western cultures is impossible. It will become impossible to mention the fact that mass migration deteriorates the Western welfare systems, and the fact that mass migration leads to explosive surge of rape and murder.
So there it is a member of European Parliament laying out exactly what's going to end up happening. He's laying out exactly that this is that the Global Compact for Migration is going to have media outlets shut down. It's going to have people like you and I who try and criticize immigration, we could be faced with criminal charges over this, all because you have a concern of how this compact enacts itself. And despite the fact they say it's non-binding, like, no, you don't actually, it doesn't dictate the laws, you know that with a lot of these globalist countries, Macron in France, Merkel in Germany, and then here in Canada with Trudeau, you know that's going to get enshrined. In fact, Justin Trudeau has tried to do a lot in order to enshrine into our laws hate speech. He's done it many times already, whether it happens to be the M103, whether it happens to be Bill C-16. He's done it, and you can guarantee, especially how he's so pro-immigration, that this is what's going to end up happening. But the thing is if this is what's going to end up happening, it's not sustainable, because this is one thing that really grinds my gears on the subject, is the fact that they want to do this. They want to be able to just let anybody from anywhere come into our countries, but then how are we supposed to uphold this when we look at how many jobs are being created? We lost jobs in 2016, the first year Trudeau was in office, and then we did have a record amount of jobs that were created when it came to 2017. But 2018, we've had the same problem where we've lost more jobs. So we're actually trying to import more immigrants per year than we actually have jobs for, which means they're going to live off the system. And you can even look at someone like the Quiggin report. The Quiggin report is really good because Tom Quiggin, I believe his name is, he's a expert on counterterrorism, and he's advised governments all over the world. And he's looked into this. He's shown the problems with it, but he's also talked about how in even a very recent episode, I think it was the one about no-go zones, he was talking about how many of the people who come in, they're being brought in who are unskilled migrants. They don't have anything to contribute. At best, they'll work at the shitty minimum wage jobs. And it's taken many, on average, it's taken them years, like I think he said as long as 10 years, in order to develop the skills that they need in order to actually get a job to become a member of society. Now, that being said, many of these people who build up these skills still don't get themselves into a good job. He talked about, I think it was somewhere in like Denmark or something like that, I'm trying to remember exactly where he said it was, but one woman who spent 16 years trying to become to develop the skills in order to join the workforce, and what did she end up doing? She ended up mopping floors. So this is the problem that we have, and we've watched as the Trudeau government year after year after year has been importing people at greater rates. I mean, like we've seen this, we've had this problem with plenty of prime ministers in the past, whether it was Harper or Trudeau or Chrétien or Paul Martin or Mulroney, that they've been doing these mass migrations right now. And the main point of this is it has to do with destabilization. See, all these prime ministers, they're all actively working towards the 2030 UN agenda. And this is the Global Compact for Migration is just an extension of the 2030 agenda. And the 2030 agenda, I've said before, is a Marxist's wet dream. I mean, the things they want to do, they want to have sustainability for everyone. They want to be able to have anybody move anywhere in the country. This is what the whole idea of the Global Compact for Migration does, is it actively allows other people to come into your country, whether you want it or not. And this has to do with replacement migration, essentially. Now, the idea behind replacement migration doesn't so much have to do with, like, it's the whole point of it originally, or what we were told originally, had to do with replacing workers because we have a dwindling population and you can no longer sustain it. So you need people to come in, immigrants to come in, take over jobs because you don't have, when you had the baby boom, and then suddenly they were having less and less kids, including to today, we've had less and less kids. When you had this happen, you suddenly had a very aging population, and you didn't have the younger generation that were getting into the fields in order to look after them, as well as replacing them in their respective fields. So this is why you need migration. But the whole point of it has to do with as even Maxime Bernier kind of brought up about this idea of extreme multiculturalism, it's meant to bring people in, and then you have all these different groups inside of a country. So it looks like that if there are going to be the next sort of world war, if you want, it's not going to be country against country, but it's going to be within the countries. So you'll have one group pitted against the next. This is exactly what they do. This is what Trudeau does, despite the fact he tells the Conservatives that they're dealing in fear and divisiveness. This is what he does every time he panders to a specific group. This is absolutely what he does. But the thing is, there's a greater problem that we have, and it has to do with birth rates here in Canada. See, there is a degree when it comes to birth rates, that when it comes to birth rates, you get to a certain point, and historically speaking, you can't really come back from it. Now, Canada is sitting at 1.6 birth rates per woman. You're supposed to have about 2.1 birth rate per woman, and that's sort of like to replace yourself. You have a couple kids, and that way they replace your husband, they replace you, and that's fine. But now we've reached 1.6. Now 1.6 birth rates, and that's been steadily dropping over time. We can see that ended up, like, from the 1960s all the way to today, that birth rate is extremely small. 1.6 is when you've hit the danger zone. That's when you're starting to really have to have a concern over this. But when you hit 1.3 births per woman, you've done so much damage to the birth rates that you pretty much cannot replenish your population. That's the problem that people are going to have. And I believe that might be a birth rate that has been hit by even places like Germany now, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, this mark from here, I'm just going to Google real quick, that comes from 2016 is the last number. Let's see what Germany is at. 1.5. Okay. So again, this is from 2016. That birth rate may even be lower now if we look at more modern day numbers, 2017, 2018 numbers. So the idea of replacement migration, it has to do, the original point of it was to actually have people to come in and replace the positions that were open, but this is not the case anymore. The idea is to replace the population itself, the local population, us. That is what we're doing. And this is a form of warfare even. See, this is the problem when you have people like the European Union, when you have people like the UN. It is a global government. I mean, the European Union is a continental government, but with the UN, they literally do want to take control. And you look at the type of people that are in positions of power inside of the UN, it's nothing to be respected anymore. I mean, we have
In the UN Human Rights Council, there are sitting on there people, countries with the worst records on human rights. The UN has become a joke, which is why I call it the useless nations these days. There's no respect necessary for a country such as this.
You don't need to respect a country just like this. So we are scheduled to sign it in about a week, maybe a little bit more than a week, maybe 8 days, I believe by about now. And it's clear that Justin Trudeau is no plans of pulling it out. This has been something that has been in the public's eye for at least a year. It was about December 2017 when President Donald Trump said he wasn't going to sign it, and since then, we've seen how plenty of other countries have pulled out of the agreement. Hungary's pulled out, Italy's pulled out, the Czechs have pulled out, and this is also becoming something that is happening on a more frequent basis. Even countries that seem to be part of this agreement are now starting to see themselves to have serious concerns and questions about this agreement that they're pulling out from. I mean, Australia's doing that now. I don't know if I can't remember if Australia's pulled out at the moment. But we also see how Germany as well. Merkel may want to sign it, but there's a lot of detractors inside her own party, not just the government, but her own party that are against this, against the Global Compact for Migration. So it's just another way of the UN horning itself into the sovereignty of a nation. It doesn't matter whether it says it's non-binding. You can guarantee that this is going to get written into our laws, which means we need somebody to pull out of it. The Conservative Party of Canada waited way too long in order to do anything about this. They waited till the last possible minute. And even then, they said, well, we're going to study it. And then it was only within the last week or two that they actually brought to House of Commons, oh, we don't want you to sign it. And Trudeau's like, well, I'm going to sign it. He says, well, the Conservative government wouldn't sign it if we were in charge. Well, lottie fucking da. You're not in charge of that, and you still have to wait at least a year before if they even get voted into office. And if they do, are they going to pull out? I strongly disagree that they are. This whole thing, what they did was just for show. That's all it was. When Michelle Rempel came out on Twitter and said, oh, people who have been asking me about this, we're going to look into it. All she was doing, she would have never brought that up if people hadn't been hounding her about it. So you can I'm guaranteeing right now that the Conservative government, if the Conservative Party, if they get voted in as the next government, they're going to let that continue, and they're not going to say a word about that. The whole point of bringing it up now was they waited to the last possible minute. They should have been going out there, letting every Canadian know what is in this agreement, but they didn't do that. Which to me just proves that they have no intention of really pulling out of it, and that they're probably just going to uphold it if they come into office. They may even campaign on this, say, oh, look at this terrible deal that Trudeau signed, this terrible agreement. But then they come into office, that's going to get dropped like a hot potato. You can guarantee that. When the Conservatives knew that Justin Trudeau wouldn't sign the agreement, they would know that right off the start. They look at his policies. They look at what he pushes for. They look at how he's increasing immigration numbers, and they know that this would just fall into place for Justin Trudeau. So they should have been, the best attack they could have done was to turn the Canadian people against Trudeau, because at the same time, this would work in two benefits for them. They could get public pressure to stop Trudeau in order to sign the Global Compact for Migration, and at the same time, they could have been making Canadians aware of what's going to happen. And this would not be very popular with Canadians. I can guarantee you, only the most strictest of open borders people would have been cool for this. But even then, they may have turned their back on the Global Compact for Migration when they hear things like it's going to undermine freedom of the press, possibly. So that would probably get more support for Justin Trudeau. But this is not what Andrew Scheer and his party has done. In fact, this is my problem with Andrew Scheer as the leader, is the fact that a lot of things that he should be taking to Trudeau, he's not taking it to Trudeau at all. I mean, great. You criticize him on Twitter. You ask him tough questions at the House of Commons he can't answer. But you know what? Unless you're sort of a political junkie, I guess would be the appropriate term. Unless you're a political junkie, nobody's taking notice of what he's doing, that he's hammering them in question period in the House of Commons. Do you think the average Canadian knows about this? They don't. They don't, because there's been a blackout when it comes to the media on this, and you've had to rely from the regular people. You have to rely on people that are speaking out about this, whether it happens to be Faith Goldie, whether that's Bill Tufts, whether that's me, whether that's Frank Vaughn, or any of the other YouTubers and people involved in this political commentary community. They're the ones speaking out about this. But the press, all they ever brought up that I can really see is just little snippets here and there. And then they talked back in July. There was like an article came out from like the Globe and Mail or something that was talking about how it's set to be signed. But this is something that they dropped as well. So you can't rely on them. So moving on from that story, we've been hearing about this interesting situation with Raj Grewal. Raj Grewal is a MP for Brampton, and about a week ago, maybe a little bit more now, he ended up resigning. Said he was going to resign. He ended up saying he was going to resign from his post because of personal and medical issues. Sounds, oh, poor guy. I hope he's doing well. Then it came out that it was because of gambling addiction, and he was millions in debt. And the first thing, before I even get too much into this, is that even someone like Justin Trudeau, they prove themselves again that they are lying. Because we look at what Justin Trudeau put out on Twitter on the 22nd of November, because it was the 21st of November, I'm pretty sure, that Raj Grewal ended up saying he was going to resign from his position. So Justin Trudeau says, yesterday I learned that Raj Grewal is facing serious personal challenges and today has announced he is stepping down as a member of parliament for Brampton East. While it may have been a difficult decision, it was the right one. I hope he receives the support he needs. So, of course, this is what everybody, when somebody comes out and they say they're having personal and medical issues, then you're like, whether they're on one side of the aisle or the other, it's like, good luck. I hope you deal with your issues. You're a human. It doesn't matter whether you're against them politically, but you hope that somebody can sort their life out. And he ended up coming out on Facebook where he made a quick, it was about an 11-minute post where he went into full details of everything. And he sort of explained himself, and this ended up coming out, when did it? It came out on Friday, so it only came out on on the 30th of November. And this is where he's explaining everything. It also just turns out that he's not going to resign, that he sorted everything out all of a sudden. So we're not going to watch the whole thing because it's long. It's like 11 minutes long. And so we're going to take a quick look into this, and we're going to see what he had to say on the situation about his gambling debts and why he's no longer stepping down.
Over this 3-year period, I accumulated a personal debt in the millions of dollars. But like many addicts and people suffering from mental health issues, I started to personally borrow money solely from friends and family to continue to fuel the gambling. I want to make it clear that every single personal loan that was made to me was made by check, that everyone has been paid back, and every loan and repayment is transparent and traceable. This has nothing to do at all with anything sinister, except to feed my own addiction. I want to apologize to my family for both having to financially bail me out and carry this burden with me. I know I have shocked many and left everyone wondering how someone with education and privilege could do something so senseless. The truth is that compulsive gambling is a mental health disorder that I suffer from, one that was fueled by my misguided belief that one more win could fix the problem. I cannot put into words the shame and embarrassment that comes with this addiction, particularly from my family and friends.
So I find it interesting, some of the things that he said in there. First of all, he said he borrowed from family. And friends. He accumulated debt in the millions of dollars, but he's since paid it off, everything. Now, I don't believe that it's just strictly from family and friends, that he just borrowed from his parents, borrowed from his brother or sister, and then maybe a few of his friends, and then that was his only debt. He definitely accumulated a lot of his own personal debt by putting up his own money. So that would be money you owe to the bank or to credit, to your credit cards, the money you owe to maybe even loan sharks or something of the sort. But he's since paid it off. How did he do this? I mean, even if he was a rich guy, having debt in the millions of dollars, you don't just pay that off in a week. That takes a lot of hard work, a lot of moving around finances in order to do so. Maybe even selling off personal assets. He also brings up the fact that this, well, he says something about how it's all transparent and documented. I'd like to see, he should probably release some of those documents, even if he's going to cover up some of the names, for instance, of people that he owed the money to, like his family or something. That's one thing. But we should be able to follow this trace of money. If you're asking me, he's a public official, he's a member of parliament. How do we know he wasn't gambling with taxpayer money? It wouldn't be the first time that just not even just someone in the liberal government, although definitely that, but people in government use taxpayer money for personal gain, whether that's gambling or buying something for themselves. It happens time and time again. So I think he should be releasing some of these documents to show where the money came from, how he paid it back, so that way we can guarantee that it wasn't stolen from the taxpayers. But he also says it's nothing sinister. It was just to fuel my own gambling addictions. Well, that doesn't really seem to be the case. Because this ended up coming out from the National Post on November 28th. Talk of then Liberal MP gambling debt surface on police wiretaps. Source. There are wiretaps up on an organized crime and terrorist investigation, and they have people talking about his gambling debts. So why would these groups, these organized crime and terrorism investigation, be talking about Raj Grewal? That doesn't make any sense if it was for nothing sinister. My guess is he was in with some bad people, and that this is going to go much farther than it is. I think he made a big mistake by not resigning, because if this goes farther and we find out that these ties went even deeper than we were suspecting, then it's going to look bad on Justin Trudeau and his government. But if he has resigned, at least it would look a little better. But as this article says, word of Liberal MP Raj Grewal's gambling debts surface on police wiretaps in a much broader probe into other people suspected of money laundering and terrorist financing, says a source with knowledge of the events. The source, who requests anonymity due to sensitivity of the matter, say Grewal's debts came to the attention of Ontario Provincial Police during an investigation of some particularly shady guys who might be involved in laundering drug money destined for an extremist group in the Middle East. There are wiretaps up on an organized crime and terrorism investigation, and they have people talking about his gambling debts on the wire, he said. It is literally a collateral issue to a bigger investigation related to drugs, gambling, and money laundering. Well, I'm not so sure that it actually is collateral damage, because this isn't the first time that the Trudeau government has done this. And actually, I talked a little bit earlier about the Quiggin Report. You can download the Quiggin Report on iTunes, the podcast. I suggest people do it because he's got a great 3-part investigation that only came out maybe within the last few months. Maybe since, I think he maybe started in his first part in, September, late September or so. But in this 3-part investigation, he shows how our money, taxpayer money, is going to fund terrorism. Yeah, it's pretty good investigation. And he's pretty sure that since then he's actually received, so that's some of the reason he's getting some hardship out of people. He's gotten a little more censorship. He's been shadow banned. And because of this, people are pretty sure that that this has to do with the fact that he ended up talking about this, how he ended up going into this investigation of our taxpayer money funding terrorism. And in there he speaks, but also I've spoke about it before, about how a few months ago that Iqra Khalid, who has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood has been tied to terrorism in the past or other extremist groups, she was giving out money to organizations that were tied to other groups. Let me see if I can actually find that for you. I'm pretty sure I should be able to. Shouldn't be too hard to find. But this is the case that we're dealing with right now. This is Khalid money to, we'll just try this. I think it might be this one. One of these two. We'll end up seeing when it comes out. Here we go. There's one.
from April 18th, 2018. Oh, this is from Spencer Fernando. I thought it was Toronto Sun as well. Trudeau government gives $23 million taxpayer dollars to groups accused of connection to Islamist, extremist, and terrorist funding. So we will go in here. Oh, that's true. They make reference to the Jaspal Atwal affair, which is when Jaspal Atwal was a Sikh extremist who actually tried to commit acts of terrorism. And I believe it was a bombing of an Air India flight, and he ended up getting invited to Trudeau's India trip. This along the fact that our defense minister Harjit Sajjan was not liked by India. It's funny. All of it seems a lot of the Canadian-born Indians that are inside of the government seem to not be liked by India for these reasons. I mean, there's this also the fact that Jagmeet Singh is banned from India, the leader of the NDP party. So it says here, the Jaspal Atwal affair, really simple story. Okay, never mind, we want that. Where is it? Where is it? Hold on. Go over here, Spencer Fernando. I think he probably has it. So, funding announcement was made by Iqra Khalid, who announced that the money was going to the National Council of Canadian Muslims and Islamic Relief. There is concern in the country about a recent funding announcement by the Trudeau government. About a week ago, Iqra Khalid, Liberal MP behind M103, announced that $23 million taxpayer dollars will be going towards the National Council of Canadian Muslims and Islamic Relief charity. As noted by Tariq Fatah in the Toronto Sun, here's why it's such a big problem. The National Council... What? No. I don't want to subscribe. The National Council of Canadian Muslims, a former branch of the U.S.-based Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, that was named in 2008 as an unindicted co-conspirator connected to the larger terrorist funding trial in U.S. history, NCCM has denied links to CARE. Islamic Relief, a worldwide charity accused of links to Islamic extremists in the Middle East Forum, Israel, and United Arab Emirates, among others. While Fatah notes that there is no solid record that the Canadian arms of these two organizations have contributed to current problematic behavior, the fact that the money is going to groups with potential connection to Islamists is not good. So it wouldn't be the first time that we would have our money going towards terrorism. But then even the story about Grewal, it ended up showing up that it's been a long time going on. It says Tory senator says he heard 18 months ago that MP Grewal was under investigation, questioned why Prime Minister's office didn't act. Quebec Senator Jean-Guy Dagenet and Assistant Richard Desmarais say they were at an Ottawa reception in May of 2017 when a retired RCMP officer told them that he had been informed about a probe. A Conservative senator and his aides said that they were told 18 months ago that Liberal MP Raj Grewal was under investigation for his prodigious casino gambling, and argued it is unbelievable that the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office didn't know about at the same time. And if the PMO knew then, they say, it should not have taken until last week for Grewal to resign his Toronto area seat, and until this September for him to be shifted off the Commons Financing Committee. Yeah, that's saying a lot, and it gets a little bit worse. Quebec Senator Jean-Guy Dagenet and Assistant Richard Desmarais say they were at an Ottawa reception in May 2017 when a retired RCMP officer told them that he had been informed about a probe on Grewal. He told us, just check this guy at the casino. He is spending a lot, he's under inquiry, and something will happen, Desmarais said in an interview Thursday. He said, you can go, you will see him spending his money, he is under an inquiry. If the Prime Minister's office didn't know that, it's unbelievable. It is impossible that the RCMP didn't know where he was sitting, on which committee he was acting, and everything like that, said Desmarais. Knowing that, they have to tell the Prime Minister's office. The MP for Brampton East announced last week that he was quitting the Commons, initially saying that it was for personal and medical reasons. Now, questions have been raised about Grewal's role on the Finance Committee, especially after he questioned law enforcement witnesses at hearings earlier this year about how they investigate money laundering.
The Liberals moved him off the committee on September 19th, but say it was not related to any investigation of him. I don't believe that for a second. And actually, that part right there about how he's asking them about how they investigate money laundering, that's saying a lot considering what we're finding out just now about the guy. You can't trust anything that's coming out right now that's coming to the defense of Raj Grewal. Because it seems to me that he's involved in something much bigger. And I hope that this inquiry, this investigation, goes a lot farther than it has so far. Because I know that I have a lot of questions about this. I don't believe that that he is just collateral damage, as some have suggested, such as the previous source that we were discussing. I don't believe that for a second, and I believe that he was actively involved with some nasty folks, maybe involved with some organized crime, and maybe even personally involved with terrorism that we were talking about. And that I also believe, this is all going on my presumptions, I believe that he was also actively trying to siphon off taxpayer money in order to do this. I mean, let's not forget that it was just last year, about April of 2017, so maybe closer to a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, where we found out that out of something like $9 billion that was put into the to infrastructure from the Canadian government, suddenly they were missing a few billion of that. It was about 5.5 that the Parliamentary Budget Office could only account for. So they had no idea where this money went. Not saying that it had anything to do with Raj Grewal. I have no evidence to say something like that. But we've seen how this money has constantly gone missing under the Liberal government, and now there's been next to nothing that's been done about it. So this investigation, in my opinion, has to go further. They have to really get into the books and figure out what the hell is going on with the Trudeau government, why so much money is gone missing, and why why Raj Grewal managed to pay off all his debts in a matter of a couple weeks. Because something is not smelling right here. So the next story I want to get into, it's not going to spend too much on it. It has to do with how the media is now starting to take more of an interest in Maxime Bernier's party, but you can tell that it's going to be a hit job just from already. And this comes from Derek Rants. People who don't know his channel should go check him out because he is fantastic. Not only is he funny, but he's got great information that he's constantly bringing up. So what he ended up putting out on Twitter not too long ago is just proving what I've just talking about. So this is what he ended up saying. It says, looks like the liberal hitmen have got their marching orders now and have begun their hunt. First they labeled me, then they asked me for an interview. Had the Toronto Star done any research on me at all, they would already know how I feel. And this goes on to a message that he received. He got this message that said, Dear Mr. Harrison, I am a freelance journalist working with the Toronto Star on a piece about the alt-right and Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada. So you're contributing already Maxime Bernier to the alt-right because you're putting them hand in hand, and by extension, his supporters. I understand that you are a supporter of Bernier's party and were involved in a local PPC, EDA, and was wondering if you might have a few minutes to chat this week. Might that be possible? Best, MP. Don't know. But it's reasons like this that the Toronto Star has been given the nickname the Red Star. That has to do with that they are more than anything a communist propaganda site. And I've said before that the Toronto Star needs to not be labeled as a media company, but be labeled as a propaganda machine or be labeled as a political activist group, because this is what they do. I mean, perfect example of how radical they are is when you had Andrea Horwath come out talking about how she constantly reads the Toronto Star and loves their stuff that they do. That should tell you enough, because Andrea Horwath is a radical. Her party is radicals. And this is something I covered back before the election. You can go back. I can't remember which number of the podcast it was. It was definitely one of the numbered podcasts, and it was called the Radical New Democratic Party. And there we went through and we covered about some of the history of her MPs that she was nominating, who they were, some of their history. And this goes to people who are coming out as avowed Marxists, people who have quoted Hitler, people, and not just like Hitler, like, oh, it's a good, not like sort of like Hitler, like, you know what, it's Hitler, but it's a good point. more like the quote itself, what was posted by her MP, who then denied it, said that, oh, I never posted this. I would never repost this. Yeah, I really believe that. She says, like, if you want to change the rules, first work your way up to the top and then change them, which is pretty much seemed to me what the NDP was going to do, especially because they wanted a sanctuary city and plenty of other bullshit like that. So the hits are coming on the PPC. You can guarantee that. See, one thing, somebody like Manny Ottawa, he said he ended up saying that the liberal media was going to side with Maxime Bernier and try and promote him as much as possible in order to undermine Andrew Scheer. But this doesn't seem to be the case. And I didn't really believe that would be the case because I could see where he's coming from, that he says with the CPC having the best chance of beating out Trudeau, that they're going to try and push people to be a part of Maxime Bernier's party instead. That they're going to try and push them to be members of the People's Party of Canada, so that way they can siphon off as many Conservative voters as possible. Well, the thing is Maxime Bernier, most of his voters so far, the supporters, come from the Conservative Party, but he also has supporters from the Liberals, supporters from the Greens, supporters from the NDP. Not as much as you go through those parties. Like, less and less start following him from those left-wing parties. But he does have that support. But the reason I didn't believe it is because of the fact that, to me, it seemed more likely that because of the stuff Maxime Bernier wants to push, he has a much more nationalist agenda, that this would not benefit what all our politicians are working for in Parliament when they're working to develop a more globalist agenda. And this even comes from Andrew Scheer, from some of his policies that you can see. Again, it's not nearly as severe and extreme as Justin Trudeau, but there are reasons I don't trust Andrew Scheer, and I never really liked him from the beginning. I liked the way he hammered Trudeau in the House of Commons. What else had he really done? And even recently, it's shown that Andrew Scheer has started copying a lot of Maxime Bernier's, the way he tweets out, and this is because Andrew Scheer doesn't get anything. He doesn't have many retweets. People follow him, but he doesn't really get much attention, unlike Maxime Bernier, because Maxime Bernier is actually hitting people. But my question is to some people is, what is Andrew Scheer going to do for publicity when it comes down to the next election? Because it's more likely that the media, the big corporate medias, are going to side with the left-wing parties. Most likely Trudeau, possibly Jagmeet Singh. It'll be more local papers that are going to be siding with the Conservatives, if even that. So he's going to need more exposure than what he's going to get out of the media. And before that, he could rely on people that would take it up on their own time. People like me, people like Steeper33 and other YouTubers and people who take to Twitter to try and push who he is. Try and push out the policies of Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party. But he doesn't have that anymore. Because as I've watched who has followed him, who has followed Maxime Bernier, a lot of the big conservative YouTubers from Canada were the ones who broke off and now are supporting the PPC. So Andrew Scheer doesn't have the media. He doesn't have the support of the YouTube community. He still has a few, for sure. I think James Pawson is one. I think maybe he's changed his stance, but I think James Pawson actually, for a while, was against Bernier. I'm not sure if that's changed or not. But so he doesn't have that, doesn't have the media, doesn't have the YouTubers. He's going to have to rely on his own publication machine, which is not very good. He would have to be more charismatic in order to get people's attention, which he doesn't have. And I mean, you're talking to a guy who's like, this is coming from a guy who probably falls in that category of not very charismatic. I probably am not exactly the type of person that people rally behind. I'm just here doing this because I enjoy it. So he's got to do more in order to get out there, get exposure, get attention. Michelle Rempel puts out YouTube videos, so maybe there's that. But other than that, they really don't have much. So I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard pressed for Andrew Scheer to actually win the next election. He needs to get the exposure he needs. And as I was saying a little bit earlier, it turns out that Trudeau is following what Trump is doing, and he says Trudeau quietly approves $10.5 billion corporate tax cuts to compete with Trump. But this is what I don't understand, because if you remember, it wasn't too long ago. It was on the 21st of November, which I'm pretty sure was 21st of November, when we ended up having the fall fiscal updates, where Bill Morneau said that, oh, these tax cuts, like the people on the right want us to do it, but that would add tens of billions of dollars in new debt. Well, apparently you're doing it because you can't compete with Trump. Oh, our economy's doing great. We have nothing to worry about. Well, all your subsidies aren't helping. We have the GM plant that just ended up closing, and there's questions there as to why that's going on. I mean, that's happening not just in Canada, but it seems to be going on in America too, and there's some shady business going on behind the scenes. But we have that. We have businesses leaving Canada, even though Canada's trying to present itself as some sort of green energy haven. We have green energy that is leaving our country at huge rates, and then we also have the oil industry, which is just falling flat. This has been going on for some time. So what do we have? What does Canada have in order to compete with places like America? What is drawing companies into Canada? Absolutely nothing right now. So this is all they're saying. Economy's doing great. You have nothing to worry about. Oh, yeah, we're actually going to make a bunch of corporate tax cuts because all of our taxes and everything is not going to be able to compete with Trump the way he's done it. So these key takeaways, it says, new corporate tax breaks, which will be worth some $14 billion over the next 6 years, will introduce in a fiscal update on November 21st, 2018. Not really. They kind of did, yeah, but this is something that I ended up sort of talking about a little bit on my live stream, and then I just showed that I also released another one without commentary, where I showed that they're making all of these things that employers can write off. Like they're saying, oh, if you run a business, you can write this off, you can write that off, but then they're not seeing that they just literally said earlier that you can't do that or add new debt. And meanwhile, the subsidies don't seem to do anything. So I find that a little funny that they're doing this, and they did quietly introduce it. It was sort of right there in the middle of it, and no one really talked about it. By allowing businesses to write off capital investments more quickly, particularly in manufacturing, businesses will be further incentivized to invest in expansion, which in turn should help improve competitiveness. While the cuts effectively hand more money back to Canadian companies, Trudeau's Liberal Party has resisted cutting the corporate income tax rate, preferring to sneak its corporate handouts in obscure budget updates that will likely go unnoticed by the Canadian public at large. According to Bloomberg, the cuts represent the Trudeau government's biggest gift to Canadian businesses since taking power. So this is something actually within the last bit where they say that they prefer to sneak in corporate handouts in budget updates that will likely go unnoticed by the Canadian public. This was exactly it. Everyone took notice of the $600 million that was going to the media. No one really took account of this. Of the corporate tax cuts that are going on right now. It was necessary, but I actually think this is a campaign thing. I actually think that it's because we're getting closer and closer to elections, and even though you don't officially start campaigning until something like last election, it was like 70 days before, that's when you officially started your campaigns. Despite that, just like in America, we start campaigning like a year before the elections go down. It's just unofficial. This is what Trudeau's doing. He's hoping by doing this, he's going to pull in some of the people some business people who are going to vote for his side. He's going to have some support from these corporations that'll then try and instruct their employees in order to vote for the Liberal Party. Or more specifically, my guess, is the unions. He'll try and get the unions on his side because that has happened before where the union has forced its people to vote in a specific way. And, I mean, we have the Unifor union right now, which has pretty much said that they're against Andrew Scheer's conservative government. The president of Unifor just came on to the CP.24 and full out said, fuck Doug Ford, so you know where they stand. And that is one of the largest unions for journalists out there. So this is all part of the campaigns. Alrighty. So, quickly going to touch up on the USMCA agreement because this just... Trudeau looks pathetic with his signing and what he said he's going to do after. So, this is from Gateway Pundit. Beta male Trudeau pouts at USMCA signing, won't lift his signed agreement, onlookers stun. So this is the picture that they end up talking about. This really isn't much of an article anyway. It just kind of covers this. But we have Trump that's lifting his up. We have Enrique Peña Nieto, who is the Mexican president. He's also lifting this up, but Trudeau won't do it. He looks so unhappy about everything. But remember, going back to the fiscal updates and everything that happened after the agreement was signed, like after the agreement was worked out, we had Trudeau that was coming out saying, we worked out a great deal. Chrystia Freeland did fantastic. And then Bill Morneau said, we couldn't, we needed to be united in order to stand our ground against America. And that's exactly what we did. But clearly Trudeau's not happy with the agreement. He knows that he fucked this up. Him, Chrystia Freeland, and all the people working for him, they hated them. They hated dealing with them. So, and now he's just being a little bitch about the whole situation. That's all he's doing. And I just find it hilarious. And, his big plan in order to make sure that, he sticks it to America is this. Canada will not call the new NAFTA USMCA, Trump's preferred name. In Canadian law, it will be CUSMCA, putting Canada first. This is right along the same lines of Trudeau saying, you know what? I'm not giving Trump my picture. That'll show him you put Canada first in the agreement instead of that. And if you actually notice it kind of the way that the USMCA agreement goes, it sort of went with how the parties fell in line. It was US that first brought up they wanted to renegotiate NAFTA. Mexico worked out their agreement with America first, and Canada was last. So that's why I think it kind of fell in that way. Plus, USMCA kind of sounds a little better, like just sort of flows a little better than the CUSMCA. CUSMA. But this is just a pathetic attempt by Trudeau to try and stand up to Trump. Trudeau has proven himself to be nothing more than a little beta male bitch. Because if he actually cared to stand up to Donald Trump, he would do it. But we saw what ended up happening at the G7 earlier this year in Quebec, where he pretty much, they came in, they had all these little discussions and everything, they were all in the round table, and then Trump jets off to North Korea, and then that's when Trudeau comes out in front of the podium and starts bashing Trump. So he couldn't do it when Trump was there to his face, but behind his back, that's where it ended up happening. And then that's when our tariffs came into place. Trudeau butchered this agreement. Nothing short of butchered it. He has nothing to be proud of this agreement, and that's why he's sitting there pouting. And the last story I want to quickly cover is, do you remember, many of you probably do, when a while ago, the government of Canada was asking about, they were starting to think on the idea of a handgun ban. Maybe we should ban all handguns in all of Canada. So they ended up putting out a sort of a information poll out there. They wanted to know, it was consultation. They said they wanted to know people's opinions. Should we ban them? Should we not ban them? What's your position on guns? Do you own a gun? Well, guess what? Privacy breach in Canadian handgun consultation. Minister Bill Blair admits Canadian government records IP addresses of Canadians filling out online surveys. So, we fell right into their trap. And I am one of them. I filled out this consultation. My information is now being sorted through by the Canadian government. Lovely. According to a member of Parliament, Pierre Hall Hous, Minister of Border Security and Organised Crime Reduction, Bill Blair has admitted in a privacy breach in an online survey. Paul Hous stated that the government recorded the IP address of everyone surveyed during the 2018 handgun bans consultation. When questioned as to how he knew the survey was submitted 130,000 times by Canadians, Blair answered, "I've been advised by the officials that we're overseeing its implementation that there was ways to determine the areas in which people were participating." While the consultation process from Public Safety Canada is still ongoing, the online engagement session was only open between October 11th and November 10th, 2018.
It was marketed to the Canadians as being administered in accordance with the Privacy Act. The privacy breach occurred during that 30-day period. Last October, a spokesperson for Bill Blair's office claimed the questionnaire was designed to be an open, anonymous, and barrier-free tool that provided meaningful feedback to the government of Canada, including these Canadians living and working abroad. The tool was not so anonymous, however. To determine the areas in which people were participating, the government had to track the IP addresses of everyone surveyed. An IP address is a unique string of numbers separated by periods. It identifies each computer using the Internet protocol required to communicate over a network. See, to me, this goes into the larger idea of the government that is trying to take down our information and take the guns away of law-abiding Canadians. Now, I'm not a gun owner. I don't have a firearm license, but I support the right of Canadians to own a firearm, not just for personal protection or hunting, but you never know what's going to happen in the future. And I'm concerned with the way that our country is going, that I believe that everybody should have, at the very minimum, training with a firearm. And, I'm making that with a little bit of hypocrisy because I don't really have much training in the way of firearms. Actually, I have no training, I should say. I have no training when it comes to firearms. I don't own a firearm. I don't have a firearm license. I have fired a gun once in my life, but that was literally only firing off a bullet, maybe 2 at most. So that is an extension of my background when it comes to owning and using guns. But to me, this goes into that the government is clearly trying to pick up your firearms. And they're trying to do it because what easier way to control the public than disarming them? That if they're disarmed and then the government wanted to do something radical, they could do it without having to worry about anything. I mean, even right now, if they wanted to do that, and let's just say, just for the sake of argument, they threw in the Canadian military to suppress the people for one reason or another. Even now, we will be extremely mismatched when it comes down to using our firearms against, say, the military, because the military has assault rifles, semi-automatic assault rifles. Some assault rifles are fully automatic, but the Canadian people usually are stuck with bolt actions, shotguns, which, you can use in a combat situation, but you're still at a disadvantage when compared to what is accessed by either the police or the military. So if we suddenly have the government that's trying to suppress the people, we're already at a disadvantage, and now they're trying to take even more of that away from us because they never have ever targeted any real criminals. They never really targeted the people who are responsible for committing a lot of the firearms, a lot of the shootings that go down in places like Toronto or even Ottawa right now, other major cities across the country. So this all has to do with disarming the public. Now they're using this information to get more information on the people. Who owns a firearm? Who wants to own a firearm? Because that was one of the questions. They said, do you own a firearm? And even for people who said no, such as myself, I don't own a firearm, now they can sort of see who is supporting the firearms legislation, a crackdown on these sort of people. Whenever the government steals your information such as this, it's always for an ulterior motive, every single time. So this is what the danger that comes out of This is from the danger that comes out of the breach in security in this handgun consultation. So you can guarantee that the government is actively trying to. You can guarantee that the government is actually trying to know your information, have possession of it, so that way, if anything was to go down, you are number one on the list, whether you own a firearm or not. This is one of the many reasons I don't ever trust the government or what they tell me. But I made the stupid mistake of putting my information out there on a government website, which I thought was secure. But it wasn't. It wasn't secure. Now they got me, and probably a few people that are watching this episode as well. You might be in the crosshairs too. Thank you again for joining me on the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd. It's just my stupid opinion.